It's working.
Thank you, Julian. Well, welcome to today's meeting of the Income Generation Subcommittee. My name is Steve McKay and I'm the chair of the committee. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. So with that, we'll go to the agenda, and item 1 is appointment of substitutes. I don't see any, but there are none, I take it.
Chair, no, we've got no substitutes tonight.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, none recorded, thank you. Again, any public participation? Thank you. In that case, we'll move to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March to be approved and signed. Do I have any comments in relation to those, or are they agreed? I've looked through them. I think they're okay. Yeah. Thank you. So we move on then to agenda item 5. The first item of discussion on the agenda tonight is regarding the annual and Q4 performance report for 2020 and 2021. And I presume, Flynn, you're going to give us that one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the regular performance report, but this committee, unlike any of the others, this report actually acts as a summary for much of the work for the committee. So it's not just a set of key indicators, but also some of the key projects which we're working on. So I tend to go through them in more detail. And we have a bit of discussion at each stage because these really are fundamental to the strategy which the committee has as its main objectives. The first is around the commercial strategy, which was produced about 3 years ago now, and was designed to work out a way through it, how the council could be more commercial in its thinking and its approach to things, a way that it could look to see how service delivery can at the same time generate income or become more cost effective in the way that it was managed. And a big part of that was to look at our assets and our portfolio of properties and say, well, can we think about those from a commercial point of view as well as a functional point of view? Now that whole strategy has been changed because of the Treasury has made a decision that it will not allow councils to use loans from the Public Work Loan Board where there are any intentions within the capital programme to acquire property purely for income generation. So it's not just that they won't allow us to borrow for those assets, they won't allow us to borrow at all if we have any proposal to acquire such assets. So it has really firmly closed the door on that as an approach. But where there is room for further work in that is around where properties might have a dual purpose, so they are being acquired because there is a need to intervene in the marketplace, or if there's a development opportunity as well as an income generation opportunity. So we haven't lost sight entirely of the way of looking at assets and property for the purposes of generating income. And there is one proposal that's still under consideration, one which was part of the set of assets that we've consideration, and I received a report on that yesterday, so we'll be able to feed back to the next committee in July on that was intended to be an acquisition which we could potentially use for our own purposes as offices and to let as offices for others, as well as to generate income from the retail premises which are there as well. So I'll give a fuller report on that at the next meeting. In the meantime, we've been very successful in seeking funding for some development opportunities. The Future High Streets Fund, we've had £18 million in respect to that, more or less, and that is an opportunity where we can look at acquiring assets and using them for developing the city and developing facilities within the city, and where potentially income may be generated, either from the sale of those assets once they've been developed, or for a longer term income streams to pay for the borrowing to acquire them. So, you know, our thinking around how we can intervene in Worcester and acquire assets in Worcester, generate income from those and use them for development purposes is still very much on the cards. It's still something that we can actively do and participate in. And of course, this week we've heard the news of the Towns Fund projects. We've acquired, remind me, 19.6 million from the Towns Fund. So while those are less around the acquisition of properties, there are elements of them which relate to that, and somewhere we could potentially look at developing residential areas and so on. So there are a number of things that we might do. And as a final example, we have recently acquired a property opposite Foregate Street Station, which is part of the Arches Worcester project. So it's actually set for demolition, but as part of that, we've acquired neighbouring properties, which we will be able to generate income from to help pay for the demolition work. So it's that kind of area that we're in, and the commercial strategy, which I propose to bring back to the next committee, will start to incorporate that way of thinking so that we can take that forward into future decisions. Before I go on to the next one, any comments or questions in relation to that?
Councillor Steve.
I know it's something that Councillor Mitchell has raised before about property company, and excuse me because I'm a new member to this subcommittee, so I'm just going to ask the question. I've heard about this before, spoken about many times. I was wondering how that project's coming along.
Through you, Chair. The position on that is that this subcommittee requested that a piece of work be undertaken to examine that as an option, whether a housing development company was the right thing to do. And that ran in parallel with the piece of work in the Communities Committee around the council leading social housing development. So we've tried to combine the two, and we've committed a certain amount of money from the fund, which is the Income Generation Fund, which is within the gift of this committee, to provide for the consultancy work to be undertaken. There is a report, a specification which has been drafted for that work to be undertaken, which is currently with the Director of Homes and Community, and as soon as he's viewed it and accepted it, we'll then make sure that the members of this committee has an input into that process, so we can make sure that area is covered. So the next stage is to get that specification out so that we can bid for a consultant.
Because it was in the minutes of the previous meeting, but it doesn't appear in this commentary now. So I was wondering whether this is just too early for it to appear in this commentary.
That's correct. Yes, we just the progress is outside the remit of this committee. It's currently within the Communities Committee, so it's being reported there. But what we've agreed is that this committee will have input into any report before it goes back to the Communities Committee. So that's the cycle we'll go through.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Stevens' question almost answered where I was coming, because it wasn't about, it was the second part about the housing. The new direction on what we can and can't borrow money for on public works surely makes the ideas that we've bounced around here before, and I know Councillor Riaz has talked about it as well, of procuring property or building property for social housing, which is a genuine need that we would make revenue from, becomes more and more attractive, shall we say, because that is one of the few areas where we can invest in property and get a return whilst doing a genuinely good service for the people or residents of Worcester and outside of Worcester who might come here and need accommodation. So I hope that's fed into that report, because obviously there's been a subtle change in I suppose, in our financial handcuffs is one way of looking at it, but freedoms is probably the right way of looking at it. You were nodding, so I'm taking that as a yes.
Well, through you, Chair, yes, I would certainly support that. And it's not a subtle change. It's a very, this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, if I can use that phrase. Yep. It's a very big and fundamental change. So we've had to rethink that, and the commercial strategy will certainly take into account the opportunities presented around mixed tenure development, so that we've got an element of social housing plus private sector housing and market level housing, which can be used to fund subsidised housing. So that's not an unfamiliar pattern. I've seen quite a lot of examples of that around the country that's happening, and there's no reason why we can't do that here. We should be looking to bring that in.
And I think if I'm right, that's what the idea of the research is all about, to make sure that we're doing it right. We've got the right strategy in place. But yeah, fine. Councillor Riaz.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, the idea of the housing development company kind of been floated around for a while, and then obviously Steve and I formalised it at income generation at the last meeting. But the whole idea was exactly that, in terms of realising those opportunities. And it was talked about in the Communities Committee as well, the amount of good work that had gone into obviously alleviating homelessness, and where do we follow on from that, and the need that arose out of that. And I know members around this table are very interested in that piece of work. So it makes natural sense. I mean, one of the concerns was that the income generation element of the report has to be, well, not take precedent, but be a foremost at the top of the list in trying to achieve those ambitions. So as long as that is stressed out in those reports and in those findings, that'll be good.
Yes, thank you. Shane, do you want to move on to the next part of the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the next is around the income strategy delivery. Now, obviously these two strategies are related, but the income strategy was again commissioned by this subcommittee to set a set of targets and parameters around what levels of income we might generate. So as to push forward the ideas of income generation and look at alternative ways of doing that. So we've continued to explore that. But obviously, COVID has had a significant impact, and in particular, the impact on car parking. We'll look at the indicators later in terms of the current impact on that, and bring members up to date on where we are. But the question will be, what's it going to look like going forward? You know, what is there going to be the long-term effect if people are looking at different ways of home working and so on, and not coming into the office, not commuting in the same way, not parking in the car parks in the same way? Have we got to revise radically our income from that source? And if so, how are we going to generate income from other sources? And as we've said, we had planned for significant amounts of income, £500,000 a year, to be derived from our asset purchases. We are generating income of that level from the assets that we have purchased, but what that might look like in the future. And the other element to this is, if we're relying on things like the Future High Streets Fund and the Towns Fund, we are constrained by the restrictions around those funding bodies. You know, what are the rules around what we can and can't do? So in the Future High Streets Fund, we're not projecting significant income streams other than what is sufficient to recover the costs which are spent in that. But so there is a limit to how much we can use that to generate income, which could be applied to other services other than simply recovering the costs which we've incurred. But nonetheless, what we'll need to try and do is think about where our income streams are going over the next 4 to 5 years, and line that up alongside our city plan. And that will give us an indication of what the council can achieve and wants to achieve, and how ambitious we need to be in terms of our cost and income and our income efficiency strategy over that time period too. So it will be difficult. It's not an easy position to be writing this from, but I'll bring a draft back at the next meeting, and we'll see where we want to go. I've been to a couple of events lately looking at income generation and how local authorities are taking forward their commercial strategies, and I have to say they were disappointing. You know, there are not a lot of ideas or new ideas around. Most of those that were around the environmental area, because environmental sustainability is big on the government's agenda, and there is funding around. We've recently received £900,000 for our green housing approach. So there are things which we can do, but ideas from local authorities at the moment are quite limited, safe to say. So any questions around that?
Any questions, or continue with the report? All right, thank you. I think it's fair to say that it might be worthwhile, both myself and the Vice Chair, Jabba, in relation to having a conversation with you, Shane, at a later time in relation to how we can go forward with any ideas that any local authorities are coming up, because they're going to be necessary over those next few years. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I welcome any thoughts that people have on that. The third is the sports facilities, and this has always been part of the remit of this committee, because it's another area where we can intervene and potentially support income generation within the city and bring in with investment. So there have been a number of areas where the committee has been actively involved in. One was supporting the International Hockey Centre, which is due to open in the autumn. I don't know whether you've seen progress there, but the pitches are laid. They're getting quite close now. And I've had an email from the project officer there wanting to know whether members of the committee will be interested in coming along to the opening event when they get to that stage. So I'll let you know more about that when the time comes. And you'll recall that requires us to, what we agreed there is a loan of £2 million, which we will then generate some income from in terms of the interest rate that we receive from that loan. So we have an active income generation from that. So we are interested in how well it does and sustained over time. We've been involved, we sponsored the new tennis service with Freedom Leisure. That's now up and running, and floodlit tennis is taking place, as you can see from the evenings as you drive around. So that's going well as far as I can understand. We need to come back with a more detailed report on that. And the grant to the Worcester Citizens Swimming Baths has enabled them to continue through the COVID period. We've done a lot of work to support those. And because most of that is a loan, we will again generate income from that. The one that's currently in front of me now is the worn out five-a-side pitches next to Poterswell Leisure Centre. Do you know which ones I mean? They are at the back of the leisure centre, and they are in a very, very poor state. They are within a matter of weeks. In fact, one of them is currently closed. The other one has been patched up, and they are reaching a point where we need a decision. And we discussed this at our management team on yesterday. And so we will need to go directly, I think, to the Policy and Resources Committee, but I'd welcome views from members on this. Part of the solution was proposed was a futsal centre. We've sort of put that on hold, but whether there's interest in bringing that back, we've had some representations from Worcester Futsal Club, who are based in Herefordshire, as we know, coming back to us to say whether they're still really interested in doing that. And that had the opportunity for an all-weather pitch next to the centre as well. So there was quite a big, but obviously there's a lot of spend. It'll take a long time, but it will be a high-profile, very important centre for futsal, which is, of which there are very few. It'll be a national centre again, such as the hockey one. Or do we simply want to resurface the pitches that we've got, go for something much more short-term and low-key, but which will generate income? We know that five-side pitches and weather pitches are very much in demand. So what we were next expecting then is a report on those two options and what other options there may be. That will come to hopefully to the intention is that it will come to the Policy and Resources Committee in July. But we will any views I'll take now, and if members want to feed in any views on behalf of this committee before we get to that stage, then I'm welcome to receive them.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Councillor Stafford.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Purdswell Park and the five-side pitches or six-side, and they are in a terrible state. But there is real opportunity there, because where the two pitches are, you've also got sort of some dead land behind them towards the Ilford Road side. So there is opportunity to almost start from scratch and think about how that space could be used, and providing facilities and potential income. The one thing I would add, though, is that the car park at the leisure centre is maxed out at many times of the day, where it's already overspilling, people parking on the verges. It's pre-COVID, it's not at the steady state, because you can have football pitches being used, you can have events going on in the sports hall, you can have swimming galas going on, or just people going to the swimming pool. You've got the really good play area there with the Spitfire, as well as people just using the park for walking and dog walking, jogging, and what have you. So if anything's going to go in there that's going to increase the overall footfall, which obviously would be the intent, or then I think we need to look at car parking provision at the same time. And I think there might be an opportunity to park over the top of the drainage ditch, which potentially create some spaces, but I'd just recommend that parking's looked at the same time.
Through you, Chair, there was a report done by Cllr, a transport study, as part of the futsal report, and what they concluded was that the increase in traffic would not be significant enough to place an additional burden on the traffic, on the parking facilities that were already there. That if there were futsal tournaments, and they would be at the same size as a swimming gala, so as long as there was sufficient planning around when events took place, then that could be managed. Now, that question has been raised. I mean, I can't go by, I mean, they are the professional consultants, and that's the advice they've given us, but obviously we'd need to look back at that when we look at the various options which we want to explore. And just to follow up on the point about the land that's available there, so a further option is not just to replace the current five-a-side pitches, but actually build a bigger pitch altogether, and a weather pitch, which could be almost tournament sized again. So it would be very useful.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Noting Councillor Stafford's comments on the parking, I do hope that we don't miss an opportunity in the development of that space, and we don't go small like we did on this. Well, we were medium on the swimming pool. Everyone knows I wanted 50 metre. If we'd had a 50 metre pool, we would be having the teams from the Commonwealth Games coming to this city to train, because it would be one of the few 50 metre pools in the country, let alone the region. We've seen that already, because they're queuing up to come and use our hockey pitches. I understand that they were going to be one team come and play. Now they want to do practice matches and stuff on it. So I think PERD as well offers a facility in the city where we could make international standard sports facilities in a controlled environment, and I accept about the parking and the residential piece. So it has to be done sympathetically, but I'd rather we spent borrowed money and spent £250,000 on a foosball. Well, I don't know how much they cost, so I haven't seen the numbers, than spent 40 grand doing up 2 five-a-side pitches that a bunch of fat 50-year-olds like me kick around on a Monday night, to be perfectly honest. So the theme of that is let's aim big and be ambitious, because in the long term, we'll get the city and our children and whatever will get the benefits from it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. The views are well taken on that. Councillor Riaz.
Said exactly how I see it as well, in terms of that. If it's going to be a centre of excellence for futsal in the UK, then let's take the opportunity and make it as such. You understand? And in terms of that, so let's explore that option. But obviously, we need to have the facts and the figures in terms of the demand for it and what we can attract, so we can build that case. Because building the case is the crucial element in all of this. That's going to support our borrowing and our income targets.
Chair, if I may come back.
Yeah.
Again, Councillor Riaz and I are in violent agreement here. But actually, taking on from Councillor Stafford's comment, sometimes I think we need to ignore highways, and because that's where normally the advice comes from, and say, you know what, you think it's good enough, but we don't think it is. So we're going to say we want an extra whatever number of car parks there, because that will give confidence to the local residents. And Bilford Road is a nightmare road, that they're not going to be, because whatever, if we're going to go big, let's plan on having loads of people there. So let's make sure there is parking facilities, and that's easier said than done, I know, but I really do think we should look at it in the whole scheme when it comes around, not just an individual item. Look at the system, look at the system of systems, not the system.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And I didn't even win the vote in claims.
If I have to wait till July for the July report, then so be it. But bearing in mind what we're talking about on the need for income at the moment in relation to futsal and the way that would be progressed, do we have any idea on time, or do I wait till July?
There is a report which was ready to come to the committee in September. So we could if members were interested, have an extraordinary meeting just to have a look at that option in more detail. If you wanted to do that.
Chair, if I may, I once stumbled looking through the back of this building when we owned the bits above HMV or rented it upon the schematic of it and asked the question. And some of the officers were doing some planning down there, and they are a long way down in the planning to say that it's not just a drawing on a piece of paper, that's for sure, and it's quite exciting. So I think they're well prepared to bring it to be reviewed.
It might be as well as though we wait for the full report and find out about timings, unless. Councillor Rios, you got any thoughts on that at all?
I'll support you in having a look at that.
I don't think it'd be a bad idea. So if we could look to do that and have an extraordinary meeting. We don't meet that often. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just to suggest that as an alternative, we could have an informal meeting and I could just run through the presentation as to what the rather than have it going through an extraordinary committee, because there would be no decision. It would just be for information purposes. So we could do that by Zoom to save everybody the trouble of travelling. If you want to,
I think that would be a good idea. We're all pretty well experienced with Zoom these days, so.
Capital spend, that would be through policy and resources, is that correct?
Yes, because of the banding. Yes. There would be a recommendation on the council for capital program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The final one there is the Riverside Park improvements, which we've had a more tangential approach to. The Officer Phil Gilmore has taken over in terms of that project, and there's some detailed notes there about the stages that we've got to. The issue with it at the moment is the Towns Fund application. So that now forms part of the Riverside project within the Towns Fund. So we need a decision about how far we go forward with this, with the Towns Fund work, and then I'll report in more detail about where we've got to at the moment. It's a little bit on hold. Thank you, Tommy.
Any questions regarding this part of the report? No. Thank you. In that case, we move on to the performance indicators.
Thank you, Chair. And as Mark will take us through the performance.
Thank you. This part of the report looks at the various income streams that the council generates from its various services, and I'll just talk you through each of the graphs. So the first one's the Riverside, which is, as you can see, fairly predictable. The one underneath for the Guildhall shows a significant shortfall against the budget. As you'll be aware, this building's been closed for most of 2020 because of the pandemic, and so was unable to stage any of the events that had been booked. The positive news there is that with the lockdown lifting, events are starting to take place, and a significant number of those that had booked for last year have rebooked for the current year. Although obviously from an income point of view, we can only take the income once. So moving on to trade waste, there's a similar story here. Obviously the lockdown affected a number of businesses in the city who either had to close for a period of time, or trading well below capacity required fewer trade waste collections. So there was a marked dip in the income during the year, and for most of the year it was also below budget. So against the current target of just over 800,000, we achieved 549. But with business now picking back up, students returning to the university, then hopefully we'll be in a better place for the current year. Garden waste collection is interesting. This was one of the few bright spots on the income front for the council. Residents found that with lockdown, it was more difficult to to get to the local recycling centre to take their own garden waste. And of course, it was much more convenient to have it collected. So the number of accounts increased. The budget was already fairly challenging. We targeted as a growth item, and I'm pleased to say that that was exceeded. And coming into the new year, the early indications are that those new accounts have been retained, which is good news. From a property point of view, you'll be aware that over the last couple of years, before the rules changed on borrowing, we acquired two significant pieces of commercial property, and the rental income from those combined is just under 900,000. Slightly short of the budget because on one of them there was a rent review outstanding. I'm pleased to say that has now been settled, but a reflection of the current economic conditions, the settlement was slightly below the budget, which had been what we'd been targeting. And then moving on to the single biggest revenue stream for the council, car parking. Shane referred to this earlier, and as you'll be aware, this was a significant reduction during the year. The lowest point in the first part of the year this time last year, when the first lockdown took place, saw the income levels reduce dramatically. That then did increase during the year, but towards the end of the year, when the lockdown was reinstated, it fell back again, although not quite as low as the start of the year. That meant against a target for the year of 3.3 million, we actually achieved 1.3. Against that, of course, the government introduced a compensation scheme covering 75% of the income shortfall, which was a welcome mitigation for the council, but that compensation isn't shown in these graphs. And then next, bereavement. Naturally, the pandemic had a significant impact here, resulting in obviously an increased death rate and more services at the cemeteries and crematorium. That also meant that service times were reduced, and the charges levied by the council were also reduced accordingly. So the impact on income was somewhat mixed, but as you can see between the quarters, it did fluctuate. And overall for the year, fell just short of the budget of the 1.7 million. We'll be coming on to the bereavement report, so we can pick back up on that. Development management. This is always a difficult income stream to budget and forecast, because it tends to get distorted by larger one-off applications. And that was particularly the case in the middle of this year, when in one particular quarter, we received some significant applications, including Low Small Wharf. And together those larger ones were worth just over 100,000, which caused the spike during the year. Overall, reflecting the trends of the last 2 or 3 years, development management fell slightly short of the budget of 700,000. And then last but not least, neighbourhood income, largely generated by services provided to the county council. The income achieved for the year is just 65% of the budget at nearly 250,000. Combination of factors here. Initially, the effect of the lockdown resulting in fewer volumes needing transporting, but also that the county council have reviewed the contract and scaled back work that we need to do. And that's the last. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, John? Yeah, Councillor Stafford.
Thanks. Just general question, because it's the first time on the committee, and that's are these gross income numbers that you're measuring, or is it actual profit? Because certainly in many of them, there'll be obviously costs that would need to be tracked in order to make the income a sort of meaningful number. I can certainly, So it might be different, case by case, but I imagine in most, where income can vary, so can costs. And we might gain just as much in reducing costs and maintaining the same level of income as you can from increasing income with the same level of cost. So just general question on that basis.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, it's a good point, and to confirm, all the graphs are gross income excluding any costs. I think that the answer to the question depends on the particular income stream. So if you take the single biggest, car parking, the costs of running the car park won't fluctuate greatly with the volume. The main costs there are the team managing the operation and the maintenance of them. Equally, bereavement, the graph underneath it, the cost of the building at Aswood is a fixed cost. There will be some variable costs, particularly around running the cremators, for example. But that's relatively small in relation to the cost of the operation as a whole. Development management, the costs there are the team of people running the service, and apart from long-term changes in headcount, there isn't any fluctuation in costs there. Trade waste would be one where the costs will vary, because obviously we're running a fleet of vehicles which are fairly heavy on diesel consumption, for example. But if you've got that team driving around emptying the bins, whether they have slightly fewer to empty on any one day won't affect the cost of running the vehicles. So I think it will fluctuate in part, but by far the biggest variable element is the income. Most of the costs are relatively stable.
I'd probably still argue that we're still only looking at half the picture if we're only looking at income, because we're looking at, in the main, small differences between, say, the value, the current value versus target. In some, there's quite small variations, and some of the numbers are quite small. And I can imagine changes. There wouldn't have to be much change in the cost base for these to make the difference between the numbers that we've got presented. And certainly, you wouldn't run a business just looking at turnover. You'd be interested in profit, and I think potentially that we're only seeing half the picture.
Chair, through you, if I could just comment on that, there are two elements, Andy, to take into account. One is that the financial systems that we have aren't set up in such a way as to directly relate costs and income. It's a very complex thing to do. It's actually part of the existing income strategy that we will develop that facility, and it's still something which I'm ambitious to achieve. But it's very, very complex, and as Marcus suggested, because the costs are largely fixed, the gain has not been worth it in terms of going through the systematic changes we've got to undertake in order to get ourselves set up in that way. But it's an aspiration which we would all support. So I think that we ought to try and do that. The other thing just to mention is that local authorities cannot make a profit. We can't run our services for profit unless we do it through a company. So we have to set up an arm's length company in order to generate income. So we can only set our income at the level of costs which we incur, and obviously where we exceed that, then we're looking at the contribution to our overheads. So we talk in terms of what surplus we might generate over the gross costs of the service, but we can't, in law, we can't actively seek a profit in terms of this delivery of that unless we go through a company route. Which is a whole new area of pursuit, which we might want to do, but that's not on the table at the moment. So there are some limitations around that. It's an aspiration, really supported, but there are a couple of things which we have to take into account. And some of the discussions with officers in some of these areas there is occasionally when I have to rein things in a little bit and say, well, yeah, very much like the idea of going out and pursuing additional income, but we can only do that within certain limitations. So it's just something we need to bear in mind.
Okay, well, thanks for that note. Obviously, surplus profit, tomato. But I think the point remains, although obviously the committee is income gen, I think there's probably equal opportunity in some areas to invest to reduce cost as opposed to invest to generate additional income. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks for that explanation as well. Councillor Stephen.
Again, this might be a newbie question, but can you explain a little bit more about what neighbourhood income is? Again, I know you mentioned it's to do with the county council, but I'm guessing this might be to do with cutting grasses on roadside verges and things like that. Is it, or is this other things?
Through you, Chair. You're correct that we do cut verges in conjunction with the county council, but that's a very small piece of the overall picture. Most of this income relates to transporting street sweepings from the city to their destination, which I think is Wolverhampton. I think it's certainly outside of the city, and we do that on the county council's behalf.
So this is our road sweepings, or so although we sweep it up, it's the county council's responsibility to dispose it. We do it for them, and we get the money back.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Chair, thank you. I made the comment last night at PNR, and I'll make it again. Whilst we've lost on many of our income areas, we have been bailed out by the government to the tune of 5.6 million, which means we're sustainable, which is good news. But of course, we want to be making our own income. But I'll go back to the Riverside, which we have a target of 10,000, which we've met. I'd hazard a guess that there must have been 1 million people walk around that Riverside over the last period. And many people who would never normally or would not normally have frequented that area have now realised what a destination zone it is. And as I mentioned the other day, some of the tourists I spoke to on Saturday said, oh, fantastic. I don't think we're doing enough in that facility. And I think we need to look at other avenues or other ways of how we can generate income from there. And I think particularly now the Diglis Fish Pass is nearly complete. I believe that will become a tourist, if not interest destination. I know if I was a school child, I'd be wanting to get taken there to understand how it worked. And I'm sure that schools, much as they do up at County, in the park up there on the nature reserve. So I'd really like to see some ideas come forward of what we can do to maximise what is a fantastic feature that the city have. Stratford seem to do it quite well. I don't know whether we can go and get ideas from them, but at the moment, we're not. I don't think we're taking full advantage. And to throw an idea out, walking my dog around there the other day with my wife, who obviously is far brighter than me, no question about whether she's better looking than me. We were stood at the Diglis Basin where the old area harbour bet used to be, and it's empty. And we were stood on the other side, and she said, "Look at all that empty space that's not being used. They'd be great for outside bars because it was nice weather, and we're getting more used to sitting outside." So I think there's some imagination that can be employed down there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think that was a bit more of a comment than the question, and that's fine. No, that's fine. Okay, Councillor Riaz.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I admire Councillor Mitchell's ambition, and one of the problems that we have obviously down there is obviously the flooding in terms of that, and that what majority of the time prevents any private investors sort of investing heavily in that. I mean, whereas us as a council is a different matter. There's a couple of empty buildings along that stretch. There's patches of land along that stretch that we could, if it was in our remit, well, if it is in our remit, for those to explore. In terms of that, I mean, what I will say around the Riverside, which has boomed and exponentially in terms of of usage is that with the Riverside Park accreditation that we're going for and that agenda, we need to kind of incorporate that into. So another thing that we talked about last night in terms of cleaning and making that into that strategy. Once we fully adopt that into that, then we can start thinking about that, because there are further developments proposed down there and in the SWDP, as well as a new community that is at constant odds with skateboarders and all the associated problems that go with a beautiful riverside on a hot sunny afternoon.
Thank you. No other questions?
I don't disagree, but I think if you put stuff somewhere, you're going to take the skateboarders away. There aren't many skateboarders at Algar Statue anymore because there's lots of people sat out there drinking and eating. And I think you'll find that the people of Diglis might appreciate some activity there. And I think what we're doing at the Christmas fair, we're having temporary cabins in. So I agree, you don't want something in there. And I know we flood in the summer as well at times, but at least if they're temporary, you can move them out. So I'm not saying that we should start concreting over down there, but I think there's we could use our imagination a bit and think of things to do.
Yeah, thank you. It's all good food for thought or drink for thought, as you might consider. Just a couple of quick things from myself. In relation to the trade waste that we've got going, we're now doing that by weight as opposed to the old scheme. This might be early days, but I presume there's no indications from anybody customers wise that we're going to lose anything as a result of moving over to that.
You're absolutely right. It is early indications. And if you think back, the new approach was introduced not long before the pandemic started. So we haven't had a level playing field. The reason for adopting it was to address the relatively small number of customers who were compacting the waste to the point where it did fit in the bin, but was significantly more weight than we would normally expect to collect. And of course, in the disposal, we pay by weight rather than by volume. So in terms of customers who are likely to pay more, it's a relatively small group. And if they were to go somewhere else, they'd find that they were still paying that a similar sort of charge anyway. So hopefully we won't find that the customer retention will be affected.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. And then finally, the only other thing was in relation to the comments that have been made on in respect of the neighbourhood income about the county council and how it's scaled back. Do we need to revise the target?
Yes, it's a very good observation, and in the current year's budget we have done so.
In that case, then we move on to the report on bereavement services, or I should say, are we content to note the Q4 annual performance? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. And so we move on then to the bereavement services report again, which we're asked to note the progress made in enhancing the service. Mark, are you presenting this, please?
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall that this committee's commented on bereavement income on a number of occasions, and part of that has been an observation over the last 2 or 3 years. The income peaked, I think, at around £2 million, but subsequently fallen back, the pandemic aside. A significant part of that reduction has, of course, been the opening of the new crematorium at Fladbury. My main reason for bringing this report to you was just to highlight the fact that in trying to address that income reduction, the team in the bereavement service have introduced a number of new initiatives designed to improve the customer experience and offer a wider range of wider offer that not only improves that customer experience, but also as a side benefit, improves the income to the council. The report looks at obviously the trend in the cremation and burial, so in paragraph 2.3, where it splits it between the different types of service offered, whether it's the full cremation, burial, and so on, with obvious spikes relating to the pandemic, and equally in 2.4, the split between the normal underlying activity and then the extra introduced because of the pandemic. The graph in 2.6 is quite interesting. This splits the activity both at Aswood and then at Fladbury. And as you can see, Worcester is consistently holding more cremations than Fladbury does, but Fladbury is nevertheless generating a significant number, most of which would have previously come to Worcester. So I think in the comments it says Fladbury held 40% of the combined 498 funerals. And then 2.7 just looks at the income trend that I was talking about before. So in 1819, long before the pandemic, it was a peak of 2 million that fell back to 1.5 and has increased last year to nearly 1.7, but mainly because of the pandemic. The biggest new initiative that's been introduced is the new website. Previously, the crematorium bereavement services was marketed as part of the council's own website and was buried fairly well within it, if you pardon the pun. I'm pleased to say that this new website is completely standalone and has significantly more information, pictures of the site and so on. And during the month of April alone, the website had over 2,000 visits. Paragraph 3.3 just touches on the fact that, as most of you all know, typically the arrangements for a funeral are done by the funeral directors, relieving the family of the burden of having to do that at what's quite a difficult time. What that tends to mean is that afterwards the family is left to procure any memorial that they want to do. And in the past, if they wanted to do that through the council, that meant visiting Aswood to look at catalogues and so on. Now that's all available on the website, where you can look at the various options and can actually purchase directly on the website, which is a significant improvement. Paragraph 3.4 touches on the fact that as well as introducing that means of doing it, the range has also been expanded. Traditionally, memorials are quite expensive if you're talking about granite and the like. One of the options is the new memorial tree. So this is a metallic structure on which families can buy a metallic leaf inscribed with the name of their loved one, which can then be hung on the tree and is a significantly lower cost option than a typical granite type memorial. And so finally, the report just finishes with table 3.7 showing the income we generate from memorials, which in the context of the overall income of 1.7 million is a fairly modest 100,000, but has nevertheless grown over the last 3 years. And hopefully with those new introductions will continue to do so, as well as making Aswood a more attractive option than it might have been in the past.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any questions from that? Okay, Councillor Steve.
Just really a question about how do we market the crematorium? Do we wait passively for people to come to the crematorium through the funeral directors, or do we actively market our services with the different funeral directors? Because I can imagine that most people wouldn't necessarily make a decision about which crematorium or where to have their loved ones buried they probably go to a funeral director first. They get guided by them. So they're probably the decision maker or the guiding hand on, possibly for a lot of people, about where they'll be buried or cremated. So I'm just wondering, could we or should we be doing more to work with the local funeral directors to basically sell what we do and to promote our services?
Yes, this is obviously a sensitive area that you're not going to market a service in the same way you might do something that's more commercial. And you're absolutely right that I know from personal experience that the funeral directors have quite an influence in directing people at that time. So the team have undertaken 2 or 3 initiatives. They're obviously introducing the website is a great way of reaching people directly, for them to be able to look at that themselves, see what the site looks like and so on. But also in terms of the funeral directors, at the moment, the bookings that they do have to be made over telephone. And typically what funeral directors do is to book a number of slots in advance. What the team are working on is having an online booking system, which makes it much more flexible and easier for the funeral directors to do, rather than having to do it all over the telephone. And that's the sort of thing that might influence them to steer bookings our way rather than anywhere else, because of that ease of doing so.
Yeah, thank you. I think probably the best way of describing that is to suggest that any marketing that sort of does go on under those difficult circumstances is that we would encourage the funeral directors to be well aware of our website and to pass those details on to the bereaved. But other than that, it is very, very difficult. Yeah, sure. Councillor Riaz.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's not a commodity that we're selling, and it's exactly, it's not something that we market. I mean, my focus of, as I've said before, it's about relationship building with the funeral directors, and actually bringing out the human qualities of our staff that are based at the crematorium, in terms of the personal service that they provide and how they guide and help people through that difficult period. And that's what needs to come out in what we're trying to tell the public here, that actually we've got a really, really great personal service here on hand, that people that truly understand that can lead you through that whole process. And that's what we're trying to, that's what we need to get out in terms of that. So a couple of events that I've been to pre-COVID through my other hat on, through the Worcestershire Ambassadors, where we met a couple of funeral directors, and one of the comments that they'd made was that we haven't had much contact with the council regarding the services and all the improvements or the changes that we've made. So that constant relationship and feeding back and being in touch with those funeral directors is key here.
Thank you for that. If there's no other questions, are we happy again to note that report? Yep. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, that brings us to the final item on the agenda of any other business. Now, I know, Councillor Stephen, you wanted to raise one particular issue in relation to residences above businesses within the city. I am aware that particular topic I've been made aware more recently that particular topic has been discussed within this committee probably about a year ago. But if you'd like to raise the issue at the very least, and so we can decide whether or not, as you suggested, perhaps for another agenda, but please go ahead.
So there were 2 things that I was wanting to raise, and can I talk about them both? Because one, you when we talked before, you said, oh well, you were quite comfortable for me to discuss the idea of the electric car charging points, but less so for the living of the shops idea.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. So if we do it like that,
Can I talk about both?
well, if you do the first one in relation to the electric charging, that's fine. But I don't think either of them are of an urgency that needs to go on for any length of time.
No.
So if you do the first one at the very least, and then it may be worth you having a discussion, maybe with Mr. Flynn and Shane later on, another time in relation to the second, because I think he'll bring you up to date more on what's been on what was said in relation to that previous discussion about it.
Okay, so what I would like to put on the table for possibly to come to a future meeting, it's really just to introduce a topic and an idea, just to float an idea, and that is that problem at the moment with solar panels and so on is that we no longer have a very good feed-in tariff. So really, to make solar panel investment work, you have to have self-consumption. You have to use the electricity you generate. And I'm thinking that that is a potential opportunity as well as a potential problem. But then if you couple that with another problem that we have is that as a society, we do actually need to see a lot more decarbonisation of the car industry. And a lot of people don't have the ability to have electric car charging points in the homes they live because they have on-street parking. So of course we have a whole series of car parks that we control and own. And if we look at, say, for example, St Martin's Gate car park, where we've got solar panels on top of the roof, we've got a fantastic scheme there that we work together on a cross-party basis to create a canopy system where we've got solar panels above a car park. And what I was wondering whether we could look at as a committee, as a council, would be to possibly to introduce in maybe one or two sites in Worcester, a canopy style solar panel scheme where we have electric car charging points, which could then use the electricity that we're then generating from the solar panels. So that would have lots of benefits from the point of view of potentially an income stream, but obviously meeting our wider commitments for reducing carbon, but also helping the government's strategy about decarbonising transport and travel. So it's obviously quite a complicated subject and would need lots of investigation. And I don't know sitting here today whether that would be feasible or not. So what I was wondering whether if the committee thought it was worthy of having some investigation, whether we could ask officers to investigate, at least do a little bit of feasibility to see whether this would actually provide any income for the council. If it doesn't, then okay, we'll drop it. But if it does provide an income and it provides a social good as well, then why wouldn't we do it? So I just wanted to pitch that idea. And thank you very much for allowing me to raise it.
Yeah, okay, fine, thank you. It may be that we're in the hands of Shane a little bit here in relation to sort of saying, you know, would it be feasible for a small amount of work to be done in the very first instance, just to discover whether that's being used, proposed, or considered elsewhere, and then if it is, then to consider putting it on as another agenda item at a later date for this committee. Is anybody got any concerns or comments about that? Yes, Stafford.
Yeah, I think there's quite a heroic suggestion in terms of the technical issues that would need to be overcome to make it any form of income generation. You know, the grid is being decarbonised on a national level, so the CO2 savings would be, you know, would reduce through time. And I think it would cost a small fortune, generate, you know, it would just be a cost basically, not an income generation as far as I'm concerned. I think if Councillor Stephen wants to go away and find where it's been done somewhere else and provide that information, I think that would be a good point to start. But I think it's sort of would be in the high risk, minimal, potentially zero benefit in terms of income generation and environmentally, my personal view.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harris.
Yes, I mean, the idea is an interesting one, Chair, but I mean, partly what Councillor Stafford put in there in terms of is the amount of risk worth the investment, and in terms of what we gave back. But the wider question here is actually in terms of our city energy strategy. I mean, we're constantly finding that there are obviously new technologies coming forward, and whether as a city we're looking at a hydrogen strategy in the near future in terms of that. I know certainly at county level that's been talked about. So if we're going to be looking at these kinds of things, and not just in our car parks, we're in obviously public charging points, not just obviously solar related, but in terms of public electric vehicle charging points that we could charge for. I think this is a broader piece of work that needs to be done that probably doesn't sit in this remit just at the moment in terms of that, until we can finalize what our energy strategy is, and then relate to how that affects it in the Environment Committee, and then take some feedback from there. So there's probably a much wider remit and much wider piece of work that needs to become before we get to that stage.
Okay, thanks. It doesn't seem right that we do a vote for this in any other business. But what I would say is I threw the ball to Shane, and Councillor Stafford threw the ball back to yourself, Louis. So if you feel as though that there is merit in this, and you've got your information from a good source and a reasonable source, and you can come up with a reasonable strategy that would say, yeah, look, you know, such and such a council is doing this, or such and such a company is making good money out of this, then yeah, come back to us. But on the face of it, with the strategy that we've got for the city, a little bit anecdotal from Councillor Stafford at the moment, but I'm sure he can back it up with facts and figures about the costings and such like. How do you feel about that? Would you be happy to do that?
What I was hoping was that obviously an officer would go away and have a look at it and see whether it was feasible. I mean, it is possible for me to do that research, but it might be quite a technical job to do. It might need someone with more knowledge and skill than myself. But I think we have to break away from just thinking about things that are easy to do. I think we need to look at things that are 3, 5, 10 years away in the future and start planning for them. I think if we just look at the here and now, what has already been done, we won't be innovative. We won't be pushing the boundaries forward. As I say, I do believe there's a real need for people, particularly people who are living in places that haven't got the facility of having a off-road space to park their car, to charge their cars. So I think wherever you see a problem, there's obviously an opportunity, and that opportunity is to get more people to be able to use an electric vehicle who are currently unable to use an electric vehicle. And it only tends to be the posher people who've got big drives and where they can have an electric car. Wouldn't it be great for people perhaps living in the centre of the city to be able to charge their cars in the city centre? And we could be part of that solution and make money out of that by using a space which is currently pretty poorly utilised. When you think of it is just a space which is used for cars on one level. By doing something that's higher level, you've got the car parking space, plus you've got the solar energy which you're creating. And as I say, the biggest problem about producing electricity today is finding a customer for that electricity. If you can find a way to sell that electricity effectively to car users to charge up their cars, all I'm asking is, can we please investigate it properly? Perhaps with an initial amount of seed money, a few £1,000s for someone to go and have a look at it, just to see whether there's any merit in it at all, before it then either gets thrown away and say, well, it's not feasible or whatever. But I think just to discard it without doing some sort of investigation, I think, well, I think we owe it to Worcester to actually investigate ideas.
Councillor Riaz, if you'd like to, you want to respond, but then I think we're going to.
Yeah, sure. I don't fully intend to have a debate about this in this committee, Chair, and I think we should wrap it up, quite frankly. But look, the point I was trying to make, Councillor Stephen, through you, Chair, was the fact that there are emerging technologies that we haven't fully explored that we might want to adopt into, and that's not just about electric charging points and solar vehicles, and that goes in hand with what Council are doing up there and what our own environment committee is doing in terms of those technologies. So it may be that it doesn't sit in this committee initially, it sits with the environment committee to explore those options. Once we've got a strategy in terms of renewables and what that, then we can bring it back to this committee to develop on that. But that's where I'll leave it at.
Yeah, okay. I think, as I say, we can sort of draw this to a conclusion by saying, again, I'm quite happy to have a conversation with Shane outside of this meeting, and Trevor, if you want to join in, Louis as well. You know, it's not a problem. What I don't want to do is commit officers to doing a lot of work for something. And I'm not, please don't think I'm being rude. I'm not. Something sort of pulled out of the air just recently, when there's nothing to back it up. If there is something to back it up, then fine, we can certainly look at it. Okay, any other issues? Thank you very much indeed. In that case, we'll draw the meeting to a conclusion and say good night and safe journey home to everybody.